Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Lake Forest Live. I'm Steve Smith, and today we are going to be talking with someone who understands marketing and branding really well. And this is a topic I know many business owners, they need to do it well, they need to understand it even better, but it eludes a lot of people, and it's predominantly because they don't understand the difference between what marketing is and what branding is. So we're fortunate enough to have somebody in our Lake Forest Chamber member family who does this for a living, who's an expert at it, and it's going to be able to explain to us today exactly what that means. So you guys be prepared to take some great notes because you're going to really understand how this works and be able to go back and look at what you're currently doing for your own business now to figure out if you're on track or not. So let me introduce Kevin Mautino. He is the Vice President of Marketing and Brand Development for Aeronet Worldwide and also is a branding consultant for Big Fly Ideation. With over 20 years experience, he has been part of launching, managing, and redefining brands in a wide range of industries, including health and beauty care, logistics, medical, retail, manufacturing, construction, events, and self-help. Kevin's desire to be a practitioner, learning on the fly, has helped him adapt, grow, and excel in an ever-changing world of marketing and branding. So let us welcome Kevin on, and we'll learn a little more about who he is, how he got into this business, and what he knows that we need to know and benefit from.
Hello.
Good morning, Kevin.
Oh, good morning there.
How are you doing today? Glad to have you on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Good. Okay, we can see you now.
Okay.
I always love these transitions between me opening the show and introducing the guest and then just kind of waiting to see what pops up on the screen next to me. So
making sure all the connections are right on my end. So
yeah. And despite how well we run this thing, we're always surprised. Every once in a while something happens, and it's just part of life, and it's actually what makes this a lot of fun. So thank you for taking the time to come on with us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Again, thank you for having me. And yeah, obviously we're live if we're having little hiccups like this.
Hey, it's all part of being live on Facebook, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I just kind of teed up you for the audience, with your bio. But what I think we'd all really like to understand is, how did you get into this? Because it's a huge field. There's a lot of parts, and I know we're going to be talking mostly about the branding component and how that's different from general marketing. But it'd be interesting just to know, what was your journey to get to where you are?
Well, I would say, at least for me, much like a lot of people, their career is sort of a squiggly line rather than a straight line. So
right.
For me, I went to college, believe it or not, for audio engineering. So I have a degree in audio engineering. You might say, how did you end up in marketing? Well, it was something I was interested in. Post-graduation, my first job was with a marketing agency called Marcom Associates. And that's really where I cut my teeth as far as marketing, and being in an agency environment. It was really good because you weren't working in any one field, any one industry. And so it gave me the ability early on to be able to adapt to a lot of different things, and not just on product side, but on service side as well. And
so yeah. I have to ask you this though,
yeah.
If your education was in audio engineering, did you get any mileage out of that before you moved into marketing?
I am into music, so I would say that at least the core principles still are with me. But as far as actually working in a studio and working on a board, I would say, other than an internship, no.
Okay, all right, very cool. We'll keep going.
Yeah. So the agency experience was really good. Like I said, as far as being able to not only experience a lot of different industries, but in a small agency, you're also asked to wear many hats. So you're exposed to a lot of different sides of the business, a lot of different sides of the marketing industry itself. So anything from planning and strategy to actually on the execution side, whether it be design, production, and that was in the early days too of just getting into social media. So from there, and then kind of going on to my other stops, that's when I was able to pretty much expand upon that. And some time ago, I started doing my own consulting through Big Fly Ideation, which is my consulting company. And I had started that because I wanted an opportunity to be able to experiment in different areas. We all know when you get into any sort of corporate job, most likely, as the companies get bigger, the more specialized your role becomes.
Right.
So I wanted to be able to give myself an opportunity to grow, because marketing is constantly changing, constantly evolving.
Yes.
Especially once everything made the transition. Well, it was a slow transition, but it happened from being more print-based to more digital-based. I needed to have a platform and a sandbox where I could experiment, grow my skills, make new connections, and that has helped me tremendously on both sides. So, right now, I would consider myself a hybrid in the industry, as far as somebody that not only handles things in the early stages as far as strategy goes, but also I'm getting my hands dirty daily on the execution side. I'm still writing, I'm still designing, I'm still, doing production and dabbling in just about anything that I can to just stay in it and keep those muscles sharp.
Well, it's interesting because, I've been kind of loosely connected to marketing through most of my career in consumer products manufacturing, and then as in my coaching business today. And so I'm kind of always interested in, what's next and how things are currently working. And I think the big changes over time have been, the internet, okay, and just the availability of kind of plug and play technology that the average person can kind of pick up and fairly quickly use. So with all of that going on, how has that changed what people come to you for?
Well, I would say what it's helped is that obviously, the internet, as far as the business world, has created a lot of entrepreneurs in a way. A lot of micro entrepreneurs, a lot of people starting their own business that do it on a shoestring budget, but they have that idea, they have the platform, and they don't need starting capital in order to get started. And so, I've been dealing with a lot of startups and smaller businesses and individuals that are trying to build their own personal brand, or, build a brand from scratch. And so I think basically, with the internet, in marketing, business, and a lot of things, it's given everybody a chance. And so, when I see with marketing, it's just given everybody a platform and the tools as well.
Yes.
Before, we always think of marketing in the old days. It's Mad Men. It's a bunch of swarmy guys sitting around in nice suits, drinking whiskey.
Conjuring up the next successful campaign that they're going to charge a couple $1 billion for. Right?
Exactly. But now, the little guy can do it. And so they don't need that big ad agency. They don't need to be spending a premium just to get something that they may not even be able to measure the results. They're able to conceive it, they're able to publish it, they're able to measure the results, and they're able to do it in real time. And those tools are available to everybody now.
All right, so let's start off with what I think is probably the best place for a show like this is just, let's be clear, and you help us understand the exact difference between marketing and branding. Because those names, I believe, for most people, in their day-to-day walking around, are kind of interchangeable without really knowing what they're actually saying. But it, like a lot of things that we talk about, people just substitute one word for another, thinking that they're talking about the same thing. So what is the difference between marketing and branding?
Well, branding really defines the company. It's what makes it unique in its marketplace. It's what the brand stands for, and it's how it's conveyed to its core audience. Marketing is more about the tools and the tactics used to connect the audience with that brand. So, basically marketing utilizes trends, but branding should endure. Your brand is something that should come before the marketing. So it's something that you're establishing. You're almost like creating a person in a way. You've got to decide what it is, what it stands for, what separates it apart from other people or other businesses, and you're just molding this brand so that you're understanding it from top to bottom, and all the questions are answered internally, and you know what this product or service is going to be able to provide. That's defining your brand. Once you do that, then you develop the marketing plan. And
Gotcha.
the marketing tactics change over eras, change over time. And like I said before, they're trends and they come and go. You need to be able to adapt to them, but the branding of your company really should endure. It should be a brand.
All right. So when you hear about companies large and small going through rebranding efforts, why are they doing that?
Well, just because you defined what your brand is at the beginning doesn't mean that you're necessarily done branding. You don't want to necessarily change the core of who the company is. And at times, you may see companies change with the times and, whatever it might be. I was just reading recently that KFC is going to be phasing out the Colonel. So,
Oh, wow.
For whatever reason,
I might lose my interest in fried chicken.
Well, at first, I think they changed it from Kentucky Fried Chicken to KFC.
Love technology.
Like we said, we're live. Yeah.
Yes.
So I think they originally changed it to get the word fried out of there, as
yes.
As health conscious as people were being. But so that's an example when you see companies sort of do a rebrand, but at the core, you don't want to lose who you are. Even if there is a rebrand, there should still be a distinctive semblance of the company that remains in this new version.
Right.
It just might be dressed up a little differently, but rebrands that fail seem to be ones where the company just tries to change everything, from the studs all through. And
right.
A lot of the times you'll see that because brands get a really bad reputation, or they get in trouble for some reason, and they say, we're just going to rebrand. But the audience and the public are smarter than that. They usually see through it. So successful rebrands are usually ones where you didn't necessarily have to rebrand, but you're just doing a minor facelift to change with the times,
right.
Freshen it up. But at the core, it's still the same brand, it's still the same company, and people still love it for what it was. You're not changing that.
Gotcha. All right. So one of the things that I'm always big on is kind of having a reflective view of your brand, in terms of, you might know what it is, you might believe that this is who you are, but that might not mean anything if the public you're serving doesn't see the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So how do consumers determine what brands are good and which ones aren't?
Well, I would say in general, a good brand is something where the consumers want to work for that brand. And by work, I don't necessarily mean be an employee of, but basically do the work of sharing that brand to people. If you think about it, if you have something that you hold really close to your heart, or you have a product or a service that you really believe in, that you want to share it. And obviously with social media, that has been an element that has given brands exponential growth and exposure by doing so. So ultimately, yes, the success of your brand is going to be shown in sales, but the long-term success is going to be shown in customer loyalty. And that loyalty gets shown by them just really sharing it. They like it so much that they almost see themselves as satellite employees of it. They don't
right.
realize that they're doing that work on the ground for the company, but they are.
That's what I call people that are sneezers.
Yeah.
They just kind of blow stuff out there, and it sticks to other people, and other people see the benefit. And it's probably not the with the virus we've been dealing with, probably not the best way to describe it, but that's kind of how it was painted to me years ago.
Yeah, let's call them yawners now.
Yawners,
So they
okay.
yawn and everybody else starts yawning.
All right, so walk us through what a business would have to do in order to know that after they travel that process, they're going to come up with a solid brand, the something that's going to endure for them. What's the process?
So in general, you have your business strategy that will usually be laid out prior to the brand strategy, but you want to make sure that that's at the forefront, that your branding team is at least aware of the business plan. So you incorporate that main business strategy, business plan. The next is identifying your value proposition. What do you provide that most other people in the marketplace can't? Then you identify your target audience, and you go as far as to create personas, which people have probably heard of. And essentially, you're putting into buckets the different types of people that would be customers, that would be your audience, and so you're kind of creating these fake people, these personas, that you understand the profile of who it is that you're trying to address, and that makes it easier when it comes to messaging. And then at this point, you're probably creating some of the core visual elements. So whether it be, logo, look and feel, color scheme, all that kind of good stuff that visually you want to go through the research and bake into your brand. Along with that comes the messaging and company voice. So, with company voice, it can be tricky, but it's sort of establishing internally, these are the things that we convey. This is how we speak, whether it be, we are marketing to this particular audience, so it's going to be a little bit more casual tone. You got to make sure that the tone and the voice is consistent across the board, or at least consistent with the various audiences, or this comes off inauthentic. And then your initial branding vehicle, right now, obviously website. That's, the website is always the hub of your brand. It seems to be, in general, unless you are just completely brick and mortar, it is in general who all of your marketing efforts are pointing back into. So that's your hub. From there, you're creating your marketing plan, you're determining the channels and tactics you're going to utilize. And from there, it's pretty much execute the plan, analyze the activity, and modify as needed. And then usually around annually, companies will revisit this, reevaluate it, and plan, or they'll revisit it and kind of see what the brand perception is through a number of different ways. So that's essentially it. But it's something that you do need to revisit, not necessarily at a brand level, although it's good to modify, as we've talked about. But when it comes to marketing, you need to really make sure that you're utilizing what's available, the tools out there, and that you're doing it properly.
Now, I know you've worked in a lot of different industries. So at some point, you've probably run into basic mistakes that companies make when they try to brand themselves, that for which you get called in and you have to either undo or recreate or something of that nature. What do you see most frequently that companies misstep on when they're trying to create a brand?
Sometimes it depends on the industry. I would say some of the older industries, like who I work, Aeronet Worldwide, who I work for, were logistics and shipping. Some of those industries move a little bit slower, and I would say those ones, some of them are still making the transition from physical marketing material, physical brand, to digital. So the move into digital, obviously, if you're not there, it needs to be accelerated. I would say another thing that I mentioned before, just with any company, is sort of being inauthentic and not being true to who you are. and when it comes to the company voice. And the thing that brands have to try not to be is all things to all people. There's only a relative handful of brands in the world, mega brands, that can do that. For the most part, if you're trying to develop your own niche, you need to be authentic in your particular space and just own who you are. And so I think, that's a big problem that brands don't do, is that they don't own who they are, and they just try to sort of be a chameleon and alter their brand identity based on who they're talking to. And it's inauthentic. If you're trying to target a particular group, don't be apologetic for it.
Right.
Target them, because
Right.
they will be loyal, they will love you, and you will succeed there, rather than trying to dilute it.
All right. So you also mentioned earlier that you worked with a lot of startups. And here's something that I've noticed. And of course, a fair amount of my marketing is networking. Okay. Because, we have a lot of professional networking groups, and some of these people have some fairly wide circles of influence. So it makes sense to get to know these folks and have them get to know you. And what I've run into a lot of times, that people that are really kind of wed to the idea of growing their business through word of mouth, through networking, through referrals, and maybe they haven't really done much on the internet. They haven't established any kind of presence out there. They all of a sudden don't really think that the branding thing is that necessary, because branding seems to get hooked with the kind of the megaphone on the internet or the media or that kind of stuff. And if it's just me, then people will get to know me and they'll do business with me. Do you run into that? And if so, what would you say to the small business owner who maybe is in professional service and is heavily reliant on networking and word of mouth, but hasn't really sat back to think about the things that you just talked about? Who am I? Why would people come to me? What would you say to somebody like that who's discounted the need for branding because they think it's all kind of hand-to-hand combat?
Yeah, I would say with those people, they obviously, well, in that scenario, that a lot of people already have a personal brand. They don't even realize it. So when they're out there networking person to person, that person has bought into them because of who they are, because of their personal brand that they perceive. So it's just a matter of taking that personal brand and then just putting it out on the digital platform. And again, being authentic, being themselves. And what you're trying to tell them is, hey, you don't have to change who you are. You don't have to change what your business or service is. We're just giving you a broader platform because you've obviously been successful in doing what you're doing and getting word of mouth out there, but let's expand your reach. So let's take you, let's expand the reach, and let's really put your personal brand out there on stage. And it might need a little bit of refining too, because like I said, people don't realize that they have a personal brand. Really, all of us have a personal brand, right, if you think about it. And that's what a lot of people go to therapy for. But in this case, they don't realize how much they have already on their own, and that if they put themselves out on the platform, they create content and they get their personality and their message out there, how much more that will come back to them in a positive way.
And I would assume that there's probably a flip side to that, and that if somebody has been reliant on their personal brand and not a formal business brand, that all of their personality styles, their quirks, maybe things that people know about them, don't particularly like about them, but they know them and they're fine people, that all gets lumped into the mix, doesn't it?
It does. And I think that is something that, we all need to be careful of, especially in the age of how much we share on social media, of taking care of that personal brand. And then that goes into a whole other category of reputation management, which, there are brands and individuals that when you plug in their name and, search engine, not a lot of good stuff comes up. And so there are companies that will come in and spend a whole lot of time and a whole lot of money trying to, maintain that reputation or try to improve that reputation. But yeah, you're right. If you have a negative personal brand, it will come back to haunt you. So it's something that, once you get out there, and if you're going to go with a personal brand, you're going to put yourself out there rather than the company or the corporation itself. You got to be ready to make sure that's about as solid as you would as if it were a corporate brand.
Well, about, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 months ago, my son and I do a podcast, a weekly podcast. And we talk mostly about professional performance, just professional, how you show up, how you conduct your affairs. The show's called Business Wingmen. So we try to be the wingman that stands behind the person and kind of, whispers in their ear, don't do that. And
Right.
So one of the episodes was on when should a CEO weigh in on a social issue? And, of course, all what 2020 was just fraught with companies either not weighing in and getting excoriated for it, or weighing in and then getting kind of the consequences of what they weighed in on.
Right.
And so I can see how that really just feeds, you've got a brand here on one hand, but now you've created a reputation that might not support that brand. That's a problem. What do you do after you've already stepped in that pond and realize, it's not, you haven't spoken to the right audience?
Yeah, I think that's, it's tough to put the toothpaste back in the tube when that happens. And
yeah, you're right.
And that's why it's so important, obviously with 2020 and the things that were going on from, there was no playbook or manual written necessarily for how to deal with that in particularly. But I will say that the more work you do on the front end, as far as defining your brand and knowing what it stands for, the easier it is to make decisions when or if something like that comes up. So, you have brands, let's say like Nike, where obviously strong product brand, but they're also very socially aware and they get involved with social issues. So they've already decided that's what that brand is going to be. So social issues come and they know how to kind of weave their narrative and weave their content into that. Another company that just produces widgets and that's all they do and don't have a desire to get into anything like that should know that they should stay away from that. And so if something were to come up, they would say, no, that's not us. We realize that it doesn't resonate with our core audience. But again, with the events of last year, there was corporate responsibility that came along with it. And I think brands during that time were best served in sort of acknowledging it and not diving too deep into it and just still observing to who they are, but obviously acknowledging situations, but not getting too deep, not getting outside of their lane, because then, like you said, it opens up a whole other box of issues that they are not necessarily equipped to get into. And then it causes negative brand sentiment.
All right. So you mentioned Nike, and I'm a big believer that anytime you're talking about these kinds of concepts, sometimes it's best to put an existing recognizable brand face to the example so that people say, oh, okay, now I know what it looks like when people do it well. Are there other companies that you can share today that you think have stayed in their lane and have weathered the storm and have a solid brand that, any business would want to emulate?
Oh, I was thinking about that coming into our talk here, and obviously the mega brands have endured. In fact, it just happened today that I got the new issue of Ad Age magazine, and they have Marketers of the Year 2021, and at the very top of that is the NFL. Just because, when in the sports world, the NFL probably has the most solid brand as far as just how they sell the product itself and the uniqueness of what football is, and how often they play games and all that, and how they market that, but also the players' social issues and all that. That Ad Age praised them for having a good blend of that.
Oh, okay.
Another one that they mentioned, Tesla. Obviously, Tesla has been disrupting a number of markets, especially when it comes to luxury cars and people sort of re-envisioning what a luxury car is and providing something unique on the market. But I would say, good brands today are really the ones that have lasted over decades. Whoever you want to sort of grab out of the air. And then you have other brands that, people may look at, let's say Geico. Geico's an interesting one because they sort of kind of break the rules when it comes to having a singular brand identity. And if you think about some of the, the marketing that they've had out there over the years, whether it be the lizard, whether it be the cavemen,
I love the cavemen.
Yeah, but the thing is, they'll run those campaigns concurrently,
right?
And that breaks all the rules, because usually you want to run one of these at the same time, but it's almost that's how they've generated interest.
Yes,
and it's sort of how they've developed this quirkiness about their brand. So in a way, the brand, in a highly commoditized field of insurance where everything's basically price driven, what they've developed is a sort of quirky brand that people know for being quirky. And so those ones are kind of interesting as well. And, the thing about good branding and good brands is that they all sort of exist in the same ecosystem, whether they're Coca-Cola all the way down to a smaller, like men's brands like Dollar Shave Club, who's been a player that has kind of developed its brand, I would say, over the last, recent several years. So in certain circles and to certain people, they're just as big as important as Coca-Cola. But obviously, when it comes to revenue and all that, they are not.
Right. Well, I mean, one that always comes to mind for me, and I like their product. I go on occasion, but I'm not wed to them because they almost have a brand that kind of gets close to being a cult, and it's In-N-Out Burger. And it's funny because I have friends that live on the East Coast. They've never been in one, they've never tasted it, but they've heard about it. And it's like, if I ever come to Southern California, one of the pit stops has got to be an In-N-Out Burger. And so I look at that kind of a brand and I think, what did they do to get to that point? Because it is cultish in a way. I mean, people have a kind of a worship type relationship with In-N-Out Burger.
Yeah, I would say a big part of In-N-Out, and you just mentioned it right there, it's exclusivity. It's the fact that it is only predominantly West Coast, Western states. And so it sort of develops its own legend. And yes, you have people here that love In-N-Out. I'm one. I'm part of the cult, I guess you would say. But but at the same time, you have other people that live in California that say, yeah, it's good, but have you tried this or that? So obviously, it's not gourmet. It's not the best. But people who are, people that are not from here hear about this. It's exclusive. It's on the West Coast. And so it has this sort of aura to it. And so that's another thing that brands do. And, when I kind of going back to my NFL example and the fact that, the NFL teams, they only have a 17 game schedule, used to be 16, there's one game a week. It's not like, NBA, MLB, or any of those where there's a game almost every single day. It's that exclusiveness. It makes it an event. So, the same sort of way, if you can make your brand exclusive or an event, it just adds to that mystique.
Well, in some of the examples you just threw out, it kind of also made me think about the fact that a really solid, well-developed brand that that really knows it owns its lane of the highway. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Also seems to be brands that are able to weather various hiccups that, that are either socially driven or politically driven or economically driven, whatever the case may be, they seem to survive them. Okay.
Right.
And the NFL has not been short on their, missteps with various controversies.
Yep.
And, Nike hasn't either. And I mean, Tesla, Tesla's a great automobile, and then you usher Musk in front of the camera, and that's where everything starts going crazy. So, but yet, and Amazon's the same way with Bezos and all his antics with his, his rockets and stuff. So these brands are solid because the consumers recognize the real value, and they seem to put up with the, the indiscretions that show up unannounced.
Yeah, and I think, obviously resources and budget have a way of, in a way, when you have millions and millions of consumers, if you lose 2% of them, you can weather that. If you have some sort of social misstep or, whatever it might be, and, you can weather that storm. And it's obviously, a strong brand. You've got the resources and the money to kind of build it back up or to patch up the holes. But when you're a smaller brand, it just makes it more important that you know who you are and you stay in your lane, because 2% of your audience to those could be devastating. And, so all the more important to just know who you are.
All right. So let's just say, as a result of watching this broadcast today, there are companies out there that kind of look at their brand and either realize they don't have any. There's nothing discernible that people look at the name and have some association with it, or they've been relying on their own personal brand and that hasn't worked so well for them. If they're now thinking, okay, I need to go out and get help. And look, there's a lot of agencies out there, people that do all different kinds of things, whether it's social media or broad-based marketing or branding or product development. It just seems like the field is really, really full. Okay. So if somebody's really thinking, all right, I need to come up with a killer brand that's going to help us, grow and continue to develop in the market over time. Give us some from the inside. What things should a business be looking at so that they find the right branding agency for them?
Well, obviously budget, depending on where you are in your business stage, if you have the big budget, you could go to some of these mega agencies and they'll do you right. I'm not saying that they won't. I mean, obviously there are a lot of people out there, from the big guys to the little guys, but yeah, you have to know your budget. And you really have to know who your audience is, because when you're investing in your company, you're investing in your product, in your service, you can waste a lot of money trying to go after the fruit the trees that are not going to bear fruit. And so, I keep on going back to knowing who you are, because understanding that at the forefront can really help you, especially if you're in the situation that you describe, in that you need to do something. You need to figure out how to move the needle. Things haven't been working. So now what do we do? And the worst thing you can do is just try to keep on throwing things against the wall and hoping something sticks, when really you need to go back to the drawing board. You need to go back to just saying, okay, who is our company? What do we stand for? What are our core values? Okay, what is our product? What sets it apart? Okay, who are our consumers? Who are the people that we think would love this product, want to work for us, share, and just take it step-by-step approach. And if you kind of take it from that genesis and kind of build forward, it all starts to kind of reveal itself. And not only are you going to have that blueprint of who the brand is, what it's about, but then once you start identifying your audience, developing these personas, you're going to kind of see the channels that you're going to need to start going down. And obviously a marketing agency, branding agency can help with all this, but starting at the beginning, it'll all start to kind of clarify, rather than freaking out and just trying everything at once to hope something sticks.
Right. All right, cool. Well, listen, this has been a fascinating conversation. I can just tell by listening to you that you've traveled that road, and you understand exactly what that brand development pathway looks like. Is there anything that we should have been talking about during this interview that I didn't ask you? Is there any kind of final thoughts you have that you want to leave with our audience today?
I think, one thing that we didn't talk about too is internal culture when it comes to a company and a brand.
Okay.
And so it's something, when you develop that brand, not only does the audience need to believe in it, but also your employees. Because, if they truly understand the brand, they can also be a personification of what the brand represents. They're brand evangelists, just like a customer would be, just like a consumer would be. Getting that internal belief system going to where everybody, they love the brand, they love working for it, that will emanate, from the center as well. And so, that's another important thing about branding. I don't think people talk about it enough because they always think about external perception. But internal perception, if you're able to match external perception and internal perception, that's about as strong as you can get, because you're not faking it on the outside.
And when you're describing that, the first brand that comes to my head is Apple.
Yeah.
I think they've done probably the best job I can think of marrying up the cultural mindset with what the brand has projected, to the public.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I actually was in an Apple store last night and talking to somebody there about iPads, and the thing is, the guy that was helping me, he was telling me, okay, well, this is what I have, and this is what my wife has, this is what we use it for. And it was just conversationally, you could tell he was a user of the product. You could tell that he had particular use cases and scenarios in his life where he was using it. And I think, to your point, that's something Apple does really good. Not only do they have an external culture, but they have an internal culture. They encourage their employees to own the products, use the products, understand different use cases so that they can be an embodiment of that use case.
Right.
And so that's a great example right there.
Yeah, as opposed to the many restaurants that you might go into and you see something on the menu and you want to order it, but you kind of want to get an endorsement from the person that's waiting on you. And the first thing you ask them is, how is this? Have you tried this? And they look at you and they go, yeah, I've tried it. It's really good.
Yeah, you don't want the server that on their lunch break they go eat down the street.
Yeah. Or when you ask them for a recommendation, the first thing to do is point out the $50 filet mignon. And so I get what you're talking about. People, they believe in it, they absorb it, they live it, and you just feel that when you either go into their place of business or even online. I mean, there's businesses I've gone to online, and you can just tell by the way the website's laid out that they're into this stuff. It's
right.
they're not just selling stuff. They buy it, they believe it, they live it.
Absolutely.
So cool. All right. Well, listen, Kevin, this has been it's been a great chat. And again, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom and giving people an appreciation for that very important aspect of the whole marketing umbrella, the branding piece, the identity piece. I think that's very important, especially today, where businesses are having to kind of recreate themselves from various stages of lockdown, and now they're faced with, gee, did my brand survive? Do people still remember who I am? So
right.
If anybody wants to get a hold of you and continue talking or find out what you can do for them, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
The best way to go through Big Fly Ideation. So bigflyideation.com. That's Big Fly Ideation. I think I spelled that correctly. I was never a spelling bee champion, but I type really well. But yeah, bigflyideation.com, and then just send an inquiry. Again, Mautino at bigflyideation.com is my email address if they want to go directly to me.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you very much, Steve. It's been a great chat, and I really appreciate being on Lake Forest Live.
Okay, well, listen, thank you, and I'm sure we'll get a chance to see each other in 2022. The Chamber's got a bunch of new events that we're going to be unleashing, so we're hoping that people will kind of warm up to the in-person environment, and certainly, we hope to see you there as well. So
yeah.
All right, folks, that brings us to the conclusion of today's broadcast. You've been listening to Kevin Mautino from Big Fly Ideation, and he has given us a great kind of a cheat sheet, thing on branding and what that constitutes and why it's important and what makes that different from marketing. So hopefully you took some good notes and you're able to use some of that. And if by all means, if you're in a situation where you think that is the secret to your business, just kind of blowing up and becoming the business you want it to be, but you can't get there yourself, then you need to be talking to this guy. So hopefully you reach out to him and find out what he can do for you. This is going to be the last program we're doing for this year. We're taking off to the rest of the year. And then in January, we're coming back with new episodes and new guests and new topics to share with you. We hope you'll stay with us and tune in whenever we send out the emails letting you know what's coming up next. But everybody have a great holiday season. Enjoy your time, your downtime, your time off. We'll see you in January. Kevin, Merry Christmas to you. We'll see you soon. Take care, everybody, and we'll talk to you later. Bye now.